Hi students, welcome back. We're moving into the second half of the course at this point, and so we're looking at the landscape of Western civilization after the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire that had dominated this civilization, had dominated the region of the Mediterranean, parts of the Middle East for so many centuries. Now it's gone, and so we're starting to see what kind of political structures, even what kind of religious structures start to emerge in its place, what starts to replace it. How is the political, the religious, the cultural landscape reconfigured after the fall of the Roman Empire to compensate for this change, this enormous change that's taken place? And so this week we're looking at one of the contenders that emerges, that in some ways makes an argument to replace the Roman Empire, and that is the religion of Islam. And so, although Islam is going to have a huge impact in what was the Roman world, it begins in an area that's outside the Roman world. It begins in the Arabian Peninsula, a part of the world that in the years prior to the emergence of Islam was typically poorer than the regions around it. Most people were nomadic, or were nomadic herders, or they were nomadic traders. And we find different trading settlements dotted over the peninsula. One of these trading settlements, the city of Mecca, was that much more prominent because it was not only a trading center, it was also a center of religious devotion. So even prior to Islam, we find that Mecca is understood to be a religious city. Religious practices in Arabia at this time are mostly based on a sort of basic polytheism, different gods associated with different rituals, different aspects of life. And Mecca is a center of shrines to lots of different gods in the Arabian Peninsula. But it's especially seen as a center of religious practice, as a city that's especially chosen by the gods because of this large black stone called the Kaaba that's in the center of religious rituals that take place in Mecca. Although there are rituals carried out to all sorts of gods that are worshipped in Mecca, the Kaaba is at the center of this ritual. So in Mecca, we have a religious center and a trading center. And so it's one of the more important cities in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, Muhammad comes from one of the priestly tribes of the city of Mecca, one of the tribes that's associated with religious practice in Mecca. He's raised as an orphan, he's raised to be a merchant, he's a successful merchant, but he's also someone who's interested in religion. He's interested in religion because of his family, because of the tribal background that he grows up in. Priestly clan, he's interested in religion, he's traveling because he's a merchant. And because he's interested in religion and he's traveling, he's coming in contact with other religions, particularly Christianity and Judaism, but also Hinduism. And he's talking to traders who are coming to Mecca. And so Muhammad is a product of both, or the religion that Muhammad is going to develop is going to be a product both of the culture of Mecca at the time and also of these other religions that he comes in contact with. And it's very important to remember that the type of Christianity that Muhammad comes in contact with is the one that's riven with all kinds of divisions. Like we talked about last week, we focused in particular on the Arian division, all these divisions about the person of Jesus and how can Jesus be both God and man. And we see that as Muhammad is developing Islam, once he sets out the Quran, records of this vision he receives from the angel Gabriel, we see an attempt to simplify these practices. That there's no sense of a Trinity, no sense of God as a father and having a relationship with his creation in the same way that we see in Christianity or Judaism. Instead, there's an emphasis on the fact that there is one God, not many. This is what distinguishes, in Muhammad's eyes, his religion from the polytheism of the Arabian Peninsula at the time. And so we see efforts to simplify that aspect of Christianity that Muhammad, as he's trying to learn about Christianity, finds very confusing. Muhammad is not welcome in Mecca once he begins to promote this new religion. He's seen as a threat to the prominence of the city by preaching a new religion contrary to the shrines, the polytheism that had been practiced in Mecca before this. And so he is driven out of Mecca and he has to flee across the desert in a journey that to Muslims is known as the Hegira. And the Hegira, the flight of Muhammad from Mecca, is seen as the beginning of Islamic history. Muhammad flees across the desert to the city of Medina. And it's in Medina that we find Muhammad is welcomed and is allowed to promote his religion openly without threats of violence or suppression for the first time. Medina is another trading city in the Arabian Peninsula, but not a center of religious worship. And so there's no cult that's already in place that Muhammad can be seen to be a threat to. And so it's in Medina that Muhammad starts to implement Islam successfully, starts to reveal talents as a community organizer that we don't see as much of in his early life. Another interesting difference between Islam and Christianity that can be recognized at this point is that whereas last week we looked at the period of late antiquity, we looked at how Christianity is trying to reconcile having Christian emperors now. What role should a Christian emperor play in the church? And there's kind of this recognition on the part of early Christians, although they're not necessarily enunciating it clearly, there's this recognition that there should be some kind of distinction between church and state. That the emperor, even if he's a Christian, the empress, if she's a Christian, shouldn't rule over the church. There's a separate church hierarchy and a separate political hierarchy. For Muhammad and for Islam, that's not the case. Even at this very early stage, we see Muhammad synthesizing political and religious authority and the practices of the state being synthesized with the practices of the religion. And so church and state are one in Islam. This is an important difference from Christianity. As we talk about Islam and the development of the teachings of Islam, we come to the teaching of jihad. Now, oftentimes today when we hear jihad, we think about acts of violence perpetrated by followers of Islam. But it's important to note that jihad means struggle and that it refers primarily to the struggle of the believer to conform his will with the teachings of God. It's not necessarily an external thing. That said, it was certainly the understanding of Muhammad and of the early Muslims that jihad incorporated an external struggle against the enemies of Islam. So it's primarily the struggle of the believer to conform their will with God. But it is also a struggle against the enemies of Islam. And another distinction between Islam and Christianity is that whereas with Christianity we see this pacifistic approach, certainly among the early Christians, this real unease about legitimating war, for Muslims, right from the beginning, it's understood that war is a legitimate way of promoting Islam. And for this we have the example of Muhammad himself. Once Muhammad becomes powerful enough, he leads an army back to the city of Mecca and conquers the city as an act of jihad, as an act of expanding Islam. And so he takes control of Mecca as well as Medina. And once he enters Mecca, he destroys all of the shrines in the city except for one, except for the Kaaba, which he sees as a gift, or he teaches is a gift from God to Abraham that marks the beginning of the monotheistic tradition. So all the other shrines are destroyed, but the Kaaba, the center of religious practice in Mecca, remains, but is repurposed in the interests of Islam. How does Islam continue to spread from this point? So by this point, it's pretty secure. Now that Muhammad has unified two of the more powerful cities, two of the wealthier cities in Arabia, it means that the forces, the armies of Islam that he leads are much more difficult to resist. Not only that, but Muhammad and his followers appeal to other Arab tribes in the peninsula to unite under an identity of being Arab in a way that was new to the peninsula. Previously, people had just identified with their tribes, but now they find the philosophical complexity of Islam in comparison with their more primitive polytheistic religions. They find that attractive. They find the idea of a unified Arab religion, Arab identity, very attractive as well. And so we start to see lots of Arab tribes adopting Islam, joining Muhammad, so that by the time of Muhammad's death in 630, most of the Arab tribes in the peninsula, most if not all, have accepted his teachings and have accepted his authority. Now, as I say, this is something that's new for the Arabian Peninsula. It's new for all these Arab tribes to be united together. And after Muhammad dies, some of these tribes suggest that they can continue to follow Muhammad's teachings without following his political rule. So remember that I said that one distinction between Christianity and Islam was that for Islam, church and state are one. You have to accept Muhammad as your political ruler if you're accepting him as your religious leader. And some of the Arab tribes after Muhammad's death say, no, we think we can follow Muhammad's teachings without following Muhammad's successor. And here's where they run afoul of Muhammad's successor. Muhammad's successor his name is Abu Bakr. He is chosen to be the successor of Muhammad and receive the title of Caliph, which means successor of the Prophet Muhammad. He is chosen to be Muhammad's successor because he is seen as the best at offering prayers on and leading and unifying the Muslim community. Very important to keep this in mind. Abu Bakr, because this is going to play into later aspects of the history of Islam. Abu Bakr is chosen as the leader of the Islamic community after Muhammad's death because he is seen as the best at offering prayers on behalf of this community to God, and because he is seen as the most effective in unifying and leading the Muslim community. And Abu Bakr is only the caliph for 2 years, but his great contribution is to maintain the unity of church and state within Islam. And he says to these Arab tribes, you cannot accept Muhammad's teachings and allow those to rule over you without also accepting the successors of Muhammad and allowing them to rule over you. And he wages a bloody series of wars, a brutal series of wars called the Ridda Wars, in order to subjugate those Arab tribes that tried to break away. And so Abu Bakr's great contribution is maintaining the unity of Islam, which is the springboard, the unity of Islam in Arabia. So now Arabia is unified for the first time under this new religious identity, and this is the foundation that Islam needs in order to dramatically expand in the centuries that follow. Thank you very much. I hope this is helpful. Hope you enjoy learning about Islam this week.